Let's do this, Joe. Let's talk about Chew in the Lou.
I feel as though to get it started, you have to kind of set the tone of how it really all began. Of Joe sitting on his couch one night drinking a glass of wine, and I never drink wine, but I was drinking a glass of wine. I guess my wife rubbed off on me, and I decided, you know what? We have a lot of really great food content at 9 PBS, and we also have a really rockin' food scene in St. Louis.
Yes.
Why don't we have a food group and some food content strictly for 9 PBS? And at the time, I remember when I first started at 9 PBS, I was like, I want to do a food show. Like, there's all these great food shows out there, all these great PBS chefs and great content and all this awesome stuff. And I remember writing down, like my third week on the job, a little Post-it note, and I wrote down Chew in the Lou. And I remember thinking, one day I want to have a show. I want to call it that. I'm going to stick this Post-it note somewhere. And I stuck it behind my computer, and it sat there for like a year and a half. And I was like, one day I'm just going to make the pitch for that. And when I was drinking my wine on that random Saturday night, I just decided, you know what? I'm going to start a Chew in the Lou Facebook group, because why not? I mean, there's people out there that want to talk about food, right?
Yeah, wine's the best liquid courage out there.
And I had a lot of it. And so I did. I set it up. I didn't ask anybody for any permission. Luckily, the old adage of better to ask for forgiveness than ask for permission worked really well in this instance. And I set it up, and, you know, a year and a half, 2 years later, we now have a couple thousand followers in that Facebook group. We now have a website, chewinthelou.org. And we now have project managers for Chew in the Lou. It's now a station thing here at 9 PBS, and now we have a Chew in the Lou podcast.
I know. It is growing legs, and it is running fast.
So I guess this is our official welcome to the Chew in the Lou podcast with 9 PBS. Welcome. I'm Joe Prosperi.
And I'm Lydia Gwin.
And welcome to Chew in the Lou.
We're so excited to have you here. We know this journey has been a long but short one, I would say. I feel like the growth just continues to keep growing even more and more, and so we're excited.
We are very excited. I mean, Chew in the Lou, when it first started, again, was really just a Facebook group, and Lydia and I did some really fun things. We've had some great Facebook Live events. We had Jack Bishop from America's Test Kitchen on with us. We had Chris Kimball from Milk Street TV. Lasse Sorensen came on and talked to us.
We can't forget Kat Neville.
Kat Neville, local food celebrity right there. Kat Neville was on, founder at the time of Feast Magazine, host of Tastemakers. Yeah. Kat Neville, big shout out to her, nominated for a daytime Emmy, like a nationwide daytime Emmy this year. Yeah. I mean, she's really hit the big time. So, you know, Chew in the Lou's come a long way, and we're excited for this podcast to really dive into some deeper topics around St. Louis food, around what's happening in the St. Louis food scene, what's hot right now, not just on your plate, but in your minds on what's to eat and what's out there. What are the trends? What's opening? What's closing? What's coming? What's going? Yeah. All the great things that are happening around the Lou.
Yeah, and not to mention my little mad science bits. I like to nerd out on food and dive into the deep science of why things are the way they are.
Yes, that is something we've learned along the way, Lydia and I working together. So I, being the 6'2" Italian guy, like to eat any and all things and make sure that they are quality food. Lydia likes to examine every food thing and understand why it tastes the way it does, how it tastes the way it does, and how to replicate it in some way.
Yes.
So it actually works out really, really well for the two of us to do a podcast, because she can make everything and I can taste everything and tell you how good it is.
Yes. Well, it works out well for me, so I'm not the only one eating it. So I'm happy that you're here to share in the wealth of all of our food.
Yeah. So. And a wealth of food in St. Louis we have. And I think that's something we're really excited to bring to our audience and those of you that follow Chew in the Lou.
Well, you know what? Let's talk about this, because I'm not a native St. Louisian. Is that the proper term? St. Louisian?
St. Louisan.
St. Louisan. So I am definitely an implant. I married someone from this fine city and moved back. But Joe, you grew up here, if I'm not correct.
Oh, absolutely.
And so your love of the St. Louis food scene has started from birth, pretty much.
Well, that's interesting, because I think that's something we want to explore on this podcast, and something that we really want all of our Chew in the Loo followers to explore in themselves, is what is your personal food journey?
Yes.
You know, that there's so much about what you eat today and the food you seek out, or in our case, the food we feed to our families or our kids, or the food that we order and carry out during a pandemic. All of that is rooted in our food journeys throughout our lives. What our parents fed us, the places we went to as kids, the things that we binged on when we came home from school, you know, that all really has created the food personalities that we are today. And it's interesting. And I think that's a really great place to start off this podcast, is talking about how did Joe become Joe as a food person, and how did Lydia become Lydia as a food person?
Oh, it is a journey.
So let's talk Lydia's journey. So
Oh,
Lydia, you
goodness.
said you are not a born in St. Louis and raised in St. Louis person,
not.
but you are a St. Louis person. You've been here long enough that
I
you
have.
know that a pork steak is a St. Louis thing,
I
and
do.
a toasted ravioli is a St. Louis thing.
And it is the most delicious St. Louis thing.
Thank God. Okay,
I want some right now. No, I grew up in a military household, which meant that our family a lot of times would have to pick up and move every 3 to 4 years. And where we lived was not on a typical military base. A lot of it was in rural Indian reservations. So, you know, I grew up in New Mexico, in Gallup, New Mexico, with the Navajo tribe. I grew up in South Dakota. And so a lot of that food journey was very different for me, because it wasn't just a typical trip to the grocery store on Sunday. We would go shopping once a month at the commissary, and we'd have a train, carts, like 4 or 5 carts filled with groceries. And we'd have to freeze our milk sometimes. We'd have to, you know, stock up on, you know, all of those dried goods. And that was sort of my journey. I moved around a lot. I didn't move to Missouri until I was 11. So between birth to 11, I'd picked up and moved all over the U.S. But the one constant in my life was the good old state of Minnesota. So both Minnesota, and I will apologize if my Minnesotan accent does come out. But both my parents are from Minnesota. And so my summers were spent in Minnesota. So my dad would send us to this French immersion summer camp in the summer. And when I mean immersion, I mean you drop your bags off, you say goodbye to mom and dad, and there's no more English.
au revoir, mom and dad.
Au revoir. Yes, it is full-on French. They go through your bags like you're going through security at the airport, and they pull out any contraband, so any, you know, CDs or books or anything that would be in English, even food, like a bag of Doritos.
Were you like a 12-year-old Lydia that was taking, like, you know, smoked paprika into this camp because you're sneaking in ingredients in a young age?
I wish I was. My taste buds back then were not as refined. I was sneaking in bags of Doritos and, you know, gum and things like that were. And the more you went to camp, so I went there for 8 years, the better you got at smuggling. So, like, I was like, you know, taking the thread out of my suitcase and stuffing stuff inside the lining of my suitcase. Like, I look back now and I'm like, there's a lot of things a lot of habits I created.
I love this story. This is fantastic. I've never heard this.
So if you ever need anything smuggled, I could give you some pointers.
Did you ever get caught?
You know what? I did a couple times. That's just because I was really careless. But I would be able to bring in full bags of Doritos. You had to eat those kind of hidden because the Cool Ranch smell people could find. Like the other kids smelt it and they would find you and be like, "You've got Doritos."
Yeah, there's nothing else smells like a Cool Ranch Dorito.
Oh, I know. So that camp was amazing in all respects. And the whole immersion part of it, too, was that when we were at French camp, we ate French food. So we would wake up in the morning and we'd have baguette and we'd have chocolat chaud and we'd have muesli and yaourt. And eventually, like for the first-time campers, it can be a little overwhelming because all of a sudden the breakfast cereal's gone, the milk's gone, and now you're eating traditional French food and traditional French style. You know, for lunch, we would have to make our own vinaigrette. So you had this gigantic jar of Dijon mustard on your table that you'd have to whip up with red wine vinegar and olive oil. So you have 8-year-olds, 10-year-olds, like making their own vinaigrette and dressing their own salad, and that you'd pass it around family style at this table.
I just sent my kids in the summer to Lego Minecraft camp.
Yeah.
And you went to French culinary school, it seems like, at 12 years old. Oh. And my kids are making Legos at summer camp. I'm doing something wrong as a parent, I feel like.
You know what? It was a blessing. My dad went, it was 2 weeks, send the kids there for 2 weeks. It was overnight camp. But it was really important for my father to make sure that all of us kids spoke a foreign language. And so that was one of the ways that we did it. But in going there every year, it opened up this whole world. Like we would have Francophone countries, like we'd be eating food from Haiti, we'd be eating Moroccan tagine and couscous. And you either learn like, okay, I'm gonna eat this, otherwise I'm gonna be hungry, and save up and buy it at the canteen later where you can buy French candy or sodas or Oranginas. So that was one of my influences.
I love Oranginas, actually.
So
believe it or not.
good. I know. If I see it, I usually have to buy it.
Yep.
But then the second influence was I'd spend my summer after camp. My grandparents would pick me up, and they run a farmstead that's been in the family for 150 years. And so I would be in the kitchen with my grandma. She'd wake up at 5 a.m. in the morning, and she would be making food for all the farm hands, and they'd be in the kitchen eating at 6 o'clock, so she'd have fresh cinnamon rolls and eggs, and it was just a constant revolving door of people coming in to eat. So as part of staying there, I would help. So that's where I learned how to bake. That's where my love of food came from. I swear, every time I would go to visit, I'd gain 10 pounds. Like I always knew to pack the bigger jeans because it was inevitable. Your waistline was going to grow. So, but that was a big part of my food journey, a big part of my influence. And, there's just so much to learn. And being Scandinavian and knowing the heritage, there's not a lot of times when we moved that we would find people that were Scandinavian. I remember getting in a fight with a kid in New Mexico about a tortilla and a lefse and how ideally they're the same. They're the same round shape. One's made with potato and one is made with corn or flour, but they're utilized in different ways, right? So unbeknownst to me in my young age, I didn't realize that there is this cross culture of everybody's got bread, everybody has something that connects them.
Look at that. Did you know that in the first episode of the Chew and Lou podcast, you learned the difference between a tortilla and a lefse? Mm-hmm. I had no idea.
Yes. So, and then summer camp actually introduced me to a Canadian friend. And I spent the next summer, backpacking through Canada with her and her parents. And so they were from British Columbia, from Vancouver, this big metropolitan city. And I was 16 and my parents let me go on my own. And it was eye-opening because here I am, having lived in all these rural parts of the United States now in this big metropolitan city. And if you don't know anything about Vancouver, it has a very large Asian population. And not to mention that, but the food there is incredible. Like the sushi is top-notch. And this was the first time that I got exposed to dim sum. Have you ever been to dim sum before?
Oh, yes.
Okay. Like the traditional dim sum where you walk in and it's round tables and they're pushing around the carts and you kind of, it's chaos. And you sit down at the table and you have all of a sudden just this gigantic gathering of carts in front of you trying to throw plates on the table, from chicken feet to steamed buns to, and then it was very chaotic and very overwhelming. And I think at one point I was like, I'll just take the cashew chicken. So I'm in this very authentic Asian restaurant in the middle of Chinatown in Vancouver.
Ordering a very Americanized version.
Not even Americanized. Springfield, Missouri. Cashew chicken. And they're looking at me and they're like, what? And I'm like, like chicken nuggets and
with
brown
cashews
gravy
in
and cashews. I look back and I just laughed out. It's like, oh, I did not know. So that was an experience. But it was wonderful to be able to have that exposure to, Chinatown and being able to go to dim sum and having sushi. And then, I traveled to Africa and I spent a month in Africa and got to experience.
Wait, this is not a food journey. This is like a food expedition across the world, Lydia.
Well, it is a journey in the sense that along every stop that I made in my life, and I haven't even reached to where I am now, there have been little nuggets of just the world opens for you little by little. Like you just are given this present and you're opening this box and you're seeing things. So when I went to Africa, it was it was very old school. There's no refrigeration. Milk is served to you in a box and it's served warm. The protein of choice is goat. So I was being served goat brain upon my first visit there. And if you ever wonder what goat brain tastes like, it's like texture of scrambled eggs. So it's palatable. Okay. Yeah. Right. And there's enough seasoning and spices and all of those things mixed into it. But along all of these travels, it was always these moments of connecting with my own culture, with my own places that I've lived, to know that, hey, we're all intertwined together. And food somehow seems to be our big unit that connects us. And I would say that, coming back here, it did open up, because when I moved back to St. Louis, I became a restaurant manager. And so in that time, I really learned a lot about the restaurant business and hospitality and the making of things.
So it's clear from that food, we'll call it a food expedition around the world.
There you go.
How you became kind of this mad scientist of ingredients.
Oh, yes.
Because you literally have seen so much. It pales, or not, I shouldn't say it pales in comparison, but it is in direct contrast, I really think, to my food journey, which is kind of the exact opposite. I'm a homeboy. I grew up in St. Louis, was born here. I literally live maybe a half a mile from my childhood home. I'm almost 40 years old, and I live in the same neighborhood. That doesn't mean that my food journey is that different than Lydia's. Mine didn't go around the world, but mine went around St. Louis.
Yours was a lot cheaper to discover.
Mine was a lot cheaper to get there. It probably had a lot more calories in it. It's interesting how, your food journey is based upon the different places that you've been and the wide variety of things that were given to you to eat with and to make meals out of. My food journey revolves a lot around the places I ate within the 3 square miles of my home growing up. When you think of what I eat today and what I feed my family today, I am Italian. My last name is Prosperi, and I come from a large Italian family. I'm one of 5 siblings. My dad is one of 5 siblings. My great aunts and uncles came over to Ellis Island from Italy, bringing with them from northern Italy great food and great family conversations, great family gatherings. And a lot of that has driven what my food journey is. And that is a family thing. It is large family gatherings. It is going out to eat with your family. And we did that a lot. And a lot of that, I eat at the same restaurants in St. Louis and eat the same foods that I was served as a small child by my parents. So I grew up in Kirkwood, and my mom always jokes that literally when she was pregnant with me, all she ate was Hacienda Mexican restaurant on Manchester Road in Rock Hill. So that is literally what half of me was when I was born, was Hacienda Mexican food. And to this day, we still get Hacienda all the time, and I love it. And that is what my kids love to go eat, because that is what we raised them on and reared them on, is let's go get Hacienda on a Friday night. And that is the food journey we've been on. My dad would always go to Ferrado's in Rock Hill and get meatballs. He would come home with a pizza and a tub of meatballs and sauce from Ferrado's, because that's what people wanted. And so that is kind of the foundations of my food journey, is just large family meals. Sitting around with our large family, eating them, getting together with the extended family. Even to this day, we still have family meals. Me and my brothers and sisters will still go over to my dad's house. We just did 2 days ago, just on a whim. Dad made a big pot of spaghetti and meatballs and cheese garlic bread and said, "Hey, everybody, come on over dinner time on Sunday." And we all showed up. Everyone was there, brought their kids, and it just kind of continues that family tradition of what it is. And a lot of that is those recipes that are passed down. My dad has a meatball recipe that he shared with me. My dad has a spadini recipe that he has shared. There's all those things that are passed on down, and that is my food journey. And it's interesting. That's what I love to seek out in St. Louis, are those restaurants that are built on family stories and tradition. Yeah. And there's so much of that. You've got Quitron over at Miley and the great stories that come around with that. There are so many restaurants like that it's a restaurant that has tradition behind it. It's not just somebody that sat down and threw a bunch of recipes together. They're rooted in something.
Well, there's heart and soul.
And
in it.
and there's so much of that happening in St. Louis.
Oh, yeah.
And there's so many people in St. Louis that have that same kind of food journey. Just a couple of weeks ago, I went to Fire Chicken in Overland to get some gochujang chicken. And my God, was it delicious.
Yeah.
And I was reading the backstory of that, and the family that opened that, those, again, are recipes that they brought from Korea and are bringing and adapting here locally and serving here in St. Louis. It's fascinating to think, how that all happens. And that's what we would kind of almost task all of our listeners for as you sit around and as you think about where you're going to dinner tonight or what you're serving your family. Think about, why am I serving this? Why are we going here for dinner? What about my past and my history and what I've eaten has shaped what I'm doing right now in terms of food? And then maybe think, can I do something different?
Yeah.
Are there things that I have not tried? That's something that in working with Chew and the Lou that I'm trying to do is think, are there areas of town that I haven't gone? I'm trying to be very cognizant of the fact that growing up where I grew up and going to school where I went to school, there are still parts of this region that I have not experienced and food cultures that I have not been a part of or tried. And I need to, because they are delicious, they are, well loved, and they are well journeyed. And so share those with the other people around you, share those with the Chew and the Lou community. That's why we set it up. This is our opportunity to have a love letter to the St. Louis food community.
Yeah.
And we want you guys to be writing those letters too.
Well, and I think on that part too is there's history in every single one of those neighborhoods that translates into the shops and into the brick and mortars and into the people that live there. And those are stories that, I love to hear about. Like, that's what makes the heart of the city. So I'm excited. I'm excited to learn more and more about St. Louis through this journey with Chew and the Lou.
And this is going to be a journey. It's going to be a fun journey.
Yeah.
You guys are going to come along on this journey with us, and it's going to be delicious.
Yes.
All right.
Grab your fork.
Grab
your
your
napkin.
Your hosts for the Chew and the Lou podcast are Joe Prosperi.
And Lydia Gwin.
Our producer is Veronica Moheski. And this is a production of 9 PBS in St. Louis.